I want to welcome you to another Facebook and YouTube Live. We come at you every month on the first or second Thursday at 7 p.m. Central, coming at you from my home office here in the northern suburbs of the Twin Cities here in Minnesota, where the snow is finally beginning to melt. And if you're checking this out for the first time, this live stream that we do with KeithRN is really to serve your needs as nurse educators and really provide you with practical strategies with solutions to really kind of the challenges that all of us face in nursing education. We know it's not rainbows and butterflies, though we make a difference in what we do. We have a very hard road to hoe. And it's really my passion to support the needs of educators through all that I do with KeithRN. And, you know, if you kind of look at the big picture of what KeithRN is and why I do what I do and what we're doing here tonight, my passion is really to reform nursing education back to its original purpose, which is preparing graduates for real-world clinical practice. Many times I feel that there's a struggle and a tension between NCLEX success and practice readiness, but they're not incompatible. And really, if we put practice first and preparing graduates for practice using practice-informed frameworks of clinical judgment, the NCLEX will take care of itself. And so how do we do this vision of really reforming how we teach? By changing how we, basically transforming what every educator does as far as how they think, so that they are empowered with practical tools and strategies to innovate their classrooms, their clinical settings, and all that they do. So it's really about transforming nursing education one educator at a time. And all of you who are listening to this or are viewing this recording, you're part of the needed change. So stay tuned, and we're going to discuss some very powerful and practical strategies on bridging teaching and practice, essentials for clinical nurse educators. And so I'd like to know who's joining me tonight. So those of you that have already popped in the chat, and there's always a little bit of a delay, just tell us where you're from. It's good to hear, kind of just to see where people are coming from. So what state, and just keep it simple, but just want to say hello. And Carol, it's good to see you. And Diane, I don't see where you're from, but Beth, thanks for joining tonight. And yes, we're going to make it fun. We're going to really make it relevant and look forward to connecting here. I just want to share a couple of things with you that if you are not familiar with KeithRN and are not getting our weekly updates, I want to just share a couple of links here for you real quickly. One is that we have a monthly newsletter that's got practical stuff and strategies to really kind of give you a great overview of how you can transform the way that you teach. And we also have weekly updates that we don't spam, but we just keep you in touch with some of our new projects and supportive strategies, recent blogs. And in that newsletter, I encourage you to check that link out, because we have a powerful blog that was written by Maria, our nurse educator consultant, on Rose Cavallero, an 80-year-old nurse educator who just retired at 80. So those of you that are thinking the 65 is as long as it goes, doesn't have to be. You can still make a difference. So want to just share that with you. But, tonight, it's not just going to be Keith tonight, which I'm thankful for, because we want to, all of us as a group of educators in our departments, we bring something to the table. And in the same way, with tonight's topic, KeithRN has created a clinical course specifically for clinical nurse educators. And it's a project that I'm really excited to announce, because as I began to I've been doing KeithRN for 13 years, creating case studies and resources for nurse educators over the last 13 years, have a website, KeithRN.com. Kind of forgot to throw in, no, I don't have the link for that. That's fine. You guys, KeithRN.com, if you're not familiar with it, you can easily find it. But the bottom line is that I noticed that there was a gap. When I look at my support as a clinical educator about 12 years ago, I wasn't supported. I got the syllabus. I got some basic stuff to just kind of guide me. I mean, there's a few articles they gave me, and they said kind of like, good luck. Here's your paperwork. Here's the evaluation form. And I had to figure it out. And as I have talked to educators over the years, that challenge has been persistent. And when I was in the Rockies about 3 years ago, I met another colleague by the name of Lisa Gonzalez, who I shared my battle with her. And Lisa, you were speaking there about some of your work with clinical judgment. I don't remember what the specific topic was at the Nurse Educator Conference in the Rockies. Could you bring us up to speed real quick?
Yes. I mean, it's just exactly like Keith said. There's such a gap in clinical education. There's so much we can do for our students, but there's just so much to learn about how to do good clinical teaching. And so one of the things that I was talking about and sharing at that conference in the Rockies was just how can you make clinical reasoning and clinical judgment skills really tangible and understanding for nursing students, because it's such a complex topic, but we want our students to know how to think like a nurse so that way they can do really good patient care, catch those situations as they unfold, and kind of know first steps to do. So it was great connecting with Keith, because I always tell him I've been a fan of him for a while too.
Yeah, no, we're kind of mutual fan. You were whatever they call that fangirling thing, and I was fan whatever fan. Is fanboying a thing, Lisa? I'm myself, but I was like, I knew your work on clinical reasoning, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit later on as we kind of highlight some of these key principles. So I'm going to bring it back in a little bit, Lisa, so don't go away. So the bottom line is that, before I get too far, I always kind of get ahead of myself and kind of I'm a little bit ADHD, I think, sometimes. I don't think I've been diagnosed, but I kind of bounce around. So the bottom line is what I do want to share with you real quickly is just a couple of links before I jump into our topic so I don't miss this. It's really important. What I want you all to know is that these Facebook Lives, you're going to find a lot of good, helpful information tonight. These links can be accessed on our Facebook channel, Think Like a Nurse, as well as we send an email out the next day if you're getting our updates. If you're not getting our updates currently, go to that link and sign up. You'll get a free case study and just get some and just stay in the loop with what we do, with all that we do. And last month we had Eddie Burns from the Benner Institute. Shelley, I don't think you were at the Benner at the conference there of Educating Nurses: A Radical Transformation, but your colleague Mary Ann Jesse was, and from the Professional Identity, with that group of icon education, which is a whole nother topic. But the bottom line is that was a powerful conference. Eddie's discussion was powerful. So I just want you to basically know that you can access that conversation and many others over the last 3 years or so. So the bottom line is, let's focus on why we're here tonight. How many of you know that just as our graduate nurses struggle to successfully transition to clinical practice, did you know the opposite is happening in nursing education? Expert nurses like myself and every one of my guests who were nurses but wanted to just kind of dip their toes in the water of clinical teaching for the first time. They just love to mentor, like myself. I just love to teach and develop the new nurses that I mentored in the ER. But they're not informed or instructed on how to successfully teach and transition to teaching students. Because how many of you know it's a different jam? Managing 8 to 10 students in clinical and doing it well, developing clinical judgment, preparing them for real world practice, using reflection and evaluation and teaching and developing clinical judgment, than having your own patient assignment. And we've got to do a better job with that. That's one of the reasons that we developed this clinical course that is hopefully going to be launched, I'm going to say April 2nd, less than a month. And I have a link for that. I'll share that in just a little bit. But the bottom line is that, we're not preparing our clinical educators, our part-time adjuncts for many of them. And so the bottom line is we really need to do a better job to prepare our clinical educators to teach. And I think that's part of the strategic reasons we have an academic practice gap. It's multiple layers. It's like an onion. But one of the layers is that our clinical educators aren't empowered with best practice principles and strategies to teach clinical. And that's one of the things that we developed with this course and the content that our educators that are here. We got 5 of the 7 content creators with us tonight, and I'm just going to highlight what those things are. So the bottom line is I am just going to share the informational page to the clinical course. And again, it's just a landing page right now. There's a free resource that you'll get if you just give us your email address and stay in the loop with the upcoming launch in the next month or so. So if you're interested, learn more there. But what I want to do right now is I'm going to kind of show you the overview of the course, and then I'm going to bring on Sarah Cano in just a moment. And she is the one who basically led off. We got 20 lessons with this course. And the very first lesson, And again, they're each about 30 minutes in length, easily digestible, transitioning to the clinical nurse educator role and strengthening transition through mentorship were lessons 1 and 2. And she also developed the 11th lesson on managing clinical situations. This is where there's no rainbows or butterflies, and it's really some of the challenges. And so, Sarah, I'm going to bring you on and just want to say thank you for all that you did to contribute your expertise, your excellence. And I just wanted you to just briefly introduce yourself to the audience and basically, kind of share your first, some of your challenges as a clinical educator that we could all learn from. Mm-hmm. And then we'll go on to what you are going to share in the course. So go right ahead.
Absolutely. Good evening, everybody. My name is Sarah Cano, as Keith introduced me. I developed a module 1 and 2, which is just that initial piece on transitioning from clinical practice, because as you mentioned, it's not the same thing, right? As being a practitioner and then, precepting or mentoring new nurses that it is to teach students. That's a completely different ballgame. And when you are transitioning to that piece, there's so many questions, so many things that you don't want to miss. So hopefully those first 2 modules will help them identify where are the areas that they need to focus on, and then that they can then explore. And through mentoring is the most important thing. So
tell us about that. So kind of, that's one of those things that is hit and miss. And how can we be more intentional in really having a structured mentoring process, even for our part-time adjuncts that many programs rely on?
I think that the first step will be to recognize that there's a difference. So that way, each program has its own little nuisance and things that you want to be aware of. So then developing a mentoring process that tailors to their program is the first step. So, where are they coming from? What kind of experiences do they have? Have they been precepting before? Have they do any of those activities at at the bedside? So that will be the first step. And hopefully, like you mentioned, not all programs have a transition program or a transition process. So they really don't know where to start. So hopefully with this content that we have developed, we give them something to start, and they can bring to their programs and say, hey, do you have something that can help me identify all these areas that I need to be aware of as a clinical educator? So it's how do I explain it? It's unique, but it has some characteristics that they're the same, but others are unique to the program. So that will be the first step. Just identify what are the things that they need to explore.
And so with transitioning, Sarah, it's like going from being an expert nurse to a novice or brand new nurse educator. What are some principles that any educator who's new here tonight, and I just want to, say thank you for those that are here, but if you're newer, especially in that transition, for the very first clinical or your second group, besides the School of Hard Knocks, what are some principles that you shared and that you could share with us tonight that would just at least, be an actionable with that transition process?
The first thing would be recognize that being a student is different than being a new nurse. So that requires a shift in the nurses, the person who's going to be doing the clinical education, that shift from remembering where you were as a nursing student. When you did that first clinical, how did you feel as a student? Then how did the faculty help you overcome those fears? So you got to start at the basics. So need to understand, especially if once you identify which course you're going to be teaching, then you know where in the ladder, so to speak, the student is. So it's not the same as when you're teaching a first semester student than when you're teaching a fourth semester student. So there is a difference in there. So that will be the first thing. They need to identify which audience do you have, so that when you know what the expectations is. Because I remember when I was the very first time when I worked as an adjunct, I was thinking, well, they should know this and this and this and this and this, but not really. I realized that very quick. I was expecting them to do something as I would do a new nurse, but I failed to recognize that it's a blank slate.
Right. So, and there's a difference between first-year students and second-year students. And we've got to kind of recognize what I learned, Sarah, First year students are like wet cement. They're messy and they're all over the place. But as they firm up in that second year, they start to take shape.
Yes.
And we need to have that realistic expectations. Wouldn't you agree?
And that's it. As a clinical educator myself, I used to tell them, the beginning, I'm holding your hand. I'm showing you the way. I'm giving you the specifics. I'm doing this and this and that, right? But then as the semester goes over, then I let go of your hand. Now you can still look back at me and you can still ask questions, but then now you kind of like, developing those skills. And then towards the end of the program, then you should be able to independently do those things. So then recognizing the level of the student is another very important aspect of clinical teaching. So you know what the expectations are.
Yeah. And if any, those that are here live tonight, if you have any questions or anything related to the specific topic of what Sarah is addressing at this moment, as well as throughout this live stream, please have your questions and be ready to ask them. And we'll definitely pop them up on the chat, and we'll take time for all questions. And so this is your chance as well to interact and dialogue with us live, since you're already here. Is there like one pearl, Sarah, that you could look at? There's one or two, this kind of, anything that you would just like to highlight from what's in the content that you wrote, and just kind of like, we didn't talk about challenging situations. We could spend a whole hour on that. And so we have 2 minutes, but, look at the challenging situations that we all face as clinical educators. What are some of the things you talk about, and what's one or two things that we could take away from that?
When it comes to challenging situations, it's just to being aware of the environment, and then where you're at, and what rules or what policies or what laws govern those areas. So not only you need to be familiar with the curriculum, but you also need to know then how they do things at an environment in which you're doing the clinicals. So for us, generally speaking, we need to be versed, and we are, on HIPAA, and we know those rules and how it translates into everything. That's very, very important, because students don't realize you can't share anything with anybody, not even with your classmates, if they're not a need-to-know basis. So it's very easy to break that rule. But the other one is FERPA, which comes from the education side, that you cannot share anything related to any specific student with anybody else. So that is another area that, again, as a new educator, I wasn't aware of, because I didn't have the preparation. I didn't have the master's degree where you go through all of that when you're learning. So recognizing that there are things that I didn't know was my first step to really, kind of blossom as a clinical educator.
There's one question we're going to get to, Sarah, that I would love to get your feedback on. Is there a model such as novice to expert for nursing students, which we know how nurses progress from beginners, novice to expert? How does that apply to nursing faculty? I'm not aware of any study that looks at the novice to expert progression for educators, but it's a fascinating question.
Very, very good. Very good question. Absolutely. Yeah. I think that as a professionals, we go through that continuum all the time, because even though I have over 35 years of experience as a nurse and over 20 years in education, if I am not exposed to teaching, let's say, graduate students, I wouldn't know what I don't know yet. So, recognizing those things will be, very important as well.
Yeah, what I would share with that, if you understand Benner's novice to expert theory, what's fascinating is that a novice nurse, and I think a novice nurse educator, right? This is my journey. They are focused on the tasks, yes, the skill development. You see, so when I look back at my journey as a clinical educator, Sarah, if we had a chance to, every student gives meds, we can drop a Foley catheter, even an NG tube on the med surg floor. That was a good clinical. Mm-hmm. But if we don't develop the clinical judgment, and using a practice-informed framework, and if we're not really helping our students develop that reflective thinking, the skills are secondary, literally. And I think as a novice educator in the clinical, I made it primary, and so I can see. So if you're familiar with Benner's novice to expert, if anybody could throw a link to an article in the chat, so that on Benner's novice to expert on the internet, if you can look at the student or look at the nurse progression, you'll see that parallel. And
that's why it's important to, as a clinical educator, you need to be versed on the curriculum, and the levels of how the student progress, and where they are when they come to you, and understanding where they come from and where they come to you. So not only you want to know where they are in your course, but also where they come from and where they're going. So then, when I was doing clinicals, then I was teaching the first med-surg course. So I needed to then understand and be versed on where they were before, which is the introduction to nursing, the very first clinical course. They were in a nursing home, so they have still not have given medications, have not done reports, some sort of things. And then where I was preparing them to, which would be med-surg too. So then there's a level where they need to be. So my responsibility is to then receive them for where they come, develop them so they can meet on the next step of the ladder.
Excellent. Well, thanks for sharing, Sarah. And you know what? We've got 4 other educators to get through, so we're gonna go on to the next topic. We've got a couple educators that develop content. For lesson 3 is on performing a professional identity, and I'm passionate about this topic. So we really, we kind of use the CNE essentials. Or not, it's not the CNE, but the CNE, Certified Nurse Educator Clinical, as a framework for this course. And so it really kind of covers a lot of things. We also kind of added some enhancements to it. We didn't use it as a strict guide, but that's where me and Lisa developed that kind of framework. Like, why do you have 20 lessons? Well, we just kind of, and we put them in a logical sequence based on that, plus our own passions and really the reflections of what do you need to know as a clinical educator. So lesson 3 is on forming a professional identity. Janet Monagle, an expert educator, very active in professional identity over in Boston, Massachusetts with, I think she used to work with Massachusetts General Hospital. I may be wrong with that, but she wrote module 3 with Deborah Leibig, who is a colleague of Nelda Godfrey's. And that goes over everything professional identity, the behaviors, the ethical practice, and all those 4 pillars that professional identity embodies. And so I commend you to that work, but we've got to develop not just the thinking. We've got to develop the ethical and the professional comportments of our practice. And that's really where that module will be very helpful for you. The 4th lesson was also written by another educator, Sabrina Bielefeld, who's over at the professor at Montgomery College in Maryland. She couldn't be with us tonight, but just focusing on laying the foundation that an educator needs to kind of build upon. Because really, when you look at novice to expert, we're going backwards. It's kind of like you were an expert nurse. Now you're a novice nurse educator, and that's a transition for all of us, and we all know what that looks like. And so the lessons 5 and 6 were developed connecting learning with curricular outcomes and preparing for your first day of clinical, otherwise known as orientation. Can be rather intimidating. Elisa Karpuska, I hope I got that right, Alyssa. You're a colleague of Shelley Bassard's over at Bowling Green University in Ohio. Thank you for joining us, and just kind of introduce yourself briefly, Alyssa, and just kind of share some thoughts in your journey with clinical teaching. And you're a younger one. You're not gray. You don't have a gray beard. No, you don't have any gray hair. So anyways, that's my dry sense of humor. Anyways, you're on.
Thank you, Keith, for having me. My name's Alyssa Karpushka. I would consider myself pretty new to nursing education. I started as an adjunct faculty in 2021, and I'm now a full-time faculty at Bowling Green State University. And I wrote lessons 5 and 6 on connecting learning with curricular outcomes and preparing for your first day. And I think these are really where it started, and it really hit home to me that I was going to begin teaching clinical. You learn a lot in the beginning about okay, this is what you need to do, but then you're given the course and you're told this is what you're going to teach. And you now then need to figure out how do you connect what the students are learning in the classroom and what they're learning in skills lab and simulation and bring that all together for them in the clinical setting. But you also have to start somewhere. So more than likely you're in a new facility. And so I always say that communication is key. One of the best things I've ever done is schedule tours ahead of time to meet the faculty on the unit or the staff on the unit, talk with the managers, get to know them and how their flow on their unit works in order to prepare myself so that I can prepare the students for their first day of clinical.
And when you look at in the first day in orientation, Alyssa, what are some things if you're just to leave a pearl or two, what would that look like? And just kind of just some practical takeaways that you share in the lesson as well as you could share tonight.
Yeah. Some of my favorite things to do are to provide the students with all the tools they need to be successful in a very succinct and organized way so that they know that if they show up to clinical with these things, they'll have what they need for the day. So I always love to create a little clinical packet for them that has the key information that they need about their site, where to go, where to find me, contact information, as well as information about their assignments they'll do, so that if they bring nothing else to clinical when they're frantically running out the door early in the morning, they have that folder and their stethoscope and things with them, and they know what to expect.
No, that's excellent. Those are the things that, it's like common sense, but if you've never done this before, Alyssa, that can be so intimidating. And it's like, how do you do that well? And so you have some great examples and some documents and other things that you share to just kind of, provide a foundation so that, again, if you're new or newer or just want to learn, you're empowered with some of, with not only the content, but also some of the worksheets and tools that are provided in each of these lessons, including yours. So thank you. Awesome. Well, let me just bring on our next educator here. And just some of the next topic after lesson 7 is beginning to go into the final one of laying the foundation. How we're kind of beginning the transition, we're laying the foundation, and now we're going to design an effective clinical day. So we're going to bring in Lisa Gonzalez, and she wrote 6 of the modules. So Lisa, thank you for all your hard work on this course. A lot of the content on clinical judgment. And so I'm just going to kind of, we have 6 lessons, 6 topics on clinical judgment development from many different angles, kind of like a diamond. There's many facets, beautiful facets of developing clinical judgment, and it's not easy. So Lisa, just want you to really just kind of like with lesson 7, talking about the designing an effective clinical day, and then really just going into some of the strategies of really facilitating learning was lesson 8 in the clinical strategies to engage learners was lesson 9. And then the other content was essentials to develop clinical judgment, teaching clinical reasoning piece by piece, and using concept-based activities to develop clinical judgment. And that's a lot of Ann Nielsen's work, a colleague of Chris Tanner's, who you kind of use a lot of her framework. So I'm going to let you just share that and just really just kind of just bring us through that and anything you'd like to share.
Yeah, and I mean, you're probably seeing a theme. A lot of us remember what it felt like to be that new educator. And so I kind of channeled that as well, too. But kind of the course sort of builds, we start laying basic foundational skills, and it kind of builds. So it kind of starts off building from what Alyssa had done with, okay, so you want to be able to teach and connect the curriculum, the course objectives, etc., within the clinical setting. Well, that can be really tricky in the clinical setting, because what do we know about clinical education? You're in a real world environment. What do we know about real world environments? It's chaotic. And so one of the things then is, as a new nurse educator, clinical educator, is, okay, well, how do I take this organized curriculum and course objectives and things that we need to learn and bring it into this chaotic environment? So one of the things that we put in here is, how do you organize your day? How do you protect your time? How do you set aside that time, those expectations for their students, get a schedule together, let them know at what point you want them to kind of be aware. And it is really important to have that time where you are talking with your students, reflecting on what they're learning, talking about the objectives for the day, really guiding their thinking. And a lot of times what I do is I'll take them off the unit, because when you're on the unit, there's so much to see. And even when you're on the unit, you want to have a plan and some objectives and some things that you want them to focus on. One of the gaps I see in clinical education right now is that there's this balance between learning skills that they need to learn based on their developmental level, based on that course, clinical judgment focus, physiologic concepts they're learning in didactic, whatever the case may be. There's a focus that you want in that clinical education course that lines up with your curriculum. But then what about the rest of the stuff? What about their short staff that day and they need you to do all their vitals? What about, this patient is coding and you don't want them to miss that opportunity to see something like that? So you're balancing these kinds of things, but organizing your day helps you shift towards, okay, we need to really focus on the purpose and what we need to accomplish here. So that's one of the things. And then creating supportive learning environments is so important. It is so scary. Some of these students, depending on your level, they've never been with a patient, depending on their experience. It's their first time in the hospital. And we as educators, sometimes we have a lot of expectations, like Sarah had shared. But what is it like for them? And so one of the things that happens is if your student is in fight or flight mode, they're freaking out, they're nervous, they're scared. That is a huge barrier for learning. There's a lot of science and cognitive learning and those kinds of things right now that we're starting to dive into. And so letting them know you're here for them, having that trust kind of building relationship, having some of those orientation where they're getting to know you, you're getting to know them. They know that you're here to help them learn. And hey, maybe it's going to take a few times to go through whatever that skill is, whatever that thinking process that you're teaching them is, but you're here to help them learn. And so there's different tips and strategies to creating a safe learning environment. And then another big thing that was something that I had to figure out that was so challenging as a new nurse educator and for quite a few years is, how do you engage your students? How do you engage? You're one person, right? And how big are your groups? Mine are about 8 max. We've had 9 before. It's a lot of students. So how am I supposed to be engaging so-and-so when I'm over here doing meds with this other student? But there's ways. And so they're missing learning opportunities if they're not with you. I'm working on my dissertation project right now. Hooray! And the research study is about really about talking to exemplar nurse educators throughout the country about what does good clinical teaching look like that's centered on clinical judgment. And I'm learning so much from this project. And one thing that I'm hearing again and again and again is that clinical nurse educator, needs to take time to learn these skills because they're counting on you. You're the only one that can really do this for them. And you, clinical nurse educator, need to be engaged in guiding your students. That is key to good clinical education. We can't, so then the question is well, what about observational experiences when you're not with them? So there's some practical things about how you can create certain learning activities, prompts, things for them to take with them, their worksheets that are really still geared towards you guiding their thinking, some prompts and activities for them, even when they're on observational experiences, or even when they're waiting for you because you're working with another student. So that way you don't have all this downtime anymore. They're always engaged in the work of learning. And so that's some of the things that I wanted to talk about. Keith, I don't know if there's anything else you want to.
There's a lot more to talk about. A couple of things I just wanted to share with you is that, you've written a couple articles in the nursing literature that are some of my favorites. And one of those is Teaching Clinical Reasoning Piece by Piece. And, you have a journal article by the same name, and your lesson that you wrote by the same title, a journal article can be kind of like, okay, it's very academic. What I want you all to know with this course is that we brought the academic language down to the everyday educator, thinking our target audience was really the brand new educator. So we don't use words like pedagogy and andragogy and other things that are just like, no, that's not going to be for a new nurse who is just an expert nurse. How do we really translate the best practices? And so we took Lisa's journal article. That was very good, very academic, very formal. Let's make it informal. And that's really what this course does. It's really an informal.
Yes, that's true.
A video summary. It's got links. It's got just concise online asynchronous content. You can access it at any time. They're all accredited for CEs. It's a total of 13 CEs, about 5.5 to 0.75 for each one, with 45 tools, Lisa.
That's true. Some of our worksheets.
They all contributed tools, and you've got some on clinical judgment. I've got some that I contributed with KeithRN from the membership site into this clinical course that are relevant. So I wanted to talk about clinical reasoning piece by piece, because that, we could talk again for all of these topics. That's why they're in the course, so you don't have to binge watch this live stream. We just want to give you a highlight, but at least a clinical reasoning piece by piece. That was a brilliant article. And I think, one of the questions that came out here, Lisa, and I want to honor our audience here, because I think this question from Mariah ties into this, and maybe there's more, but what suggestions do you have on how to manage your time with 8 students so that you can do nursing, so, tasks, develop their clinical judgment, give them equal time, and have a beneficial post-conference? So
Yes.
Lisa, that question is yours. And I think that clinical reasoning piece by piece would be, maybe you could tease some of those details out for Mariah and the rest of our audience.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is to shift your thinking about what clinical education must look like. You don't have to have all your students busy doing 8 different things. So one thing that I'm learning is group learning, group reasoning is valuable. So even if you are in post-conference, mid-shift conference, and you're debriefing one patient that one student had, if you have reserved that time, taken them away, then they will all benefit from that. You can pair your students up. So I would say for you guys, don't let yourself feel that pressure to have every single student have 2 patients, even 1 patient. It depends on their developmental level. If they are busy doing tasks all day long, we are missing the point of clinical education. So limit the division of where your students have to be, group some together, have times in clinical where you're like, okay, we're off the unit, or we're rounding on our patients. Like, we are not busy with tasks right now. We're going to talk about the topic for the day. And so in the clinical reasoning module that I developed for this course, that the article Keith was talking about is really focused on breaking down clinical judgment. It is such a complex thing for students. That's why our new grads are struggling. They're struggling. Why are they struggling? Well, because it's complex. And so if we can break this down for them in their undergrad education, then they're going to have that much more of a head start. So you don't have to teach everything every single day. So what I do is one day we talk about focus assessment all day. What's a focus assessment?
How do we
How is it different than a head to toe assessment? Then that's their prompt, that's their activity. All 8 students, whether they're paired up or each have a patient by themselves, depending on the level, they go in and do a focus assessment. And then we have other pointed focus assessment. What's an alcohol withdrawal scale? What's an NIH stroke scale? What's the purpose of them? So they do that for about 45 minutes to an hour, and then we come back. What did you learn from your focus assessment? What's relevant? What's irrelevant? What baseline have you established? What complication might you expect? What would change about your focus assessment if that complication was happening? So it really helps, like I said, to kind of bring those groups together and sort of protect those times. And you have a relationship with the nurses, because sometimes they're looking at you like, you're off the unit again. So it's like you have to talk to the nurses too and let them know, listen, hey, we're gonna do this with your patient. We're gonna do this. Our focus today is to learn about this topic. We're going to leave the unit so we can talk about all these things, and then, get them excited too about what you're learning, because sometimes there's that tension, I think, sometimes with the unit, like, what are you going to do for me while you're here sometimes, so.
Yeah, and you broke down in your module, Lisa, with clinical reasoning piece by piece, 10 different focus. And we don't have time to go through them, but what Lisa mentioned of focused assessment, and really, what does a real world focused assessment look like? And it's not the 20 minutes that they do in the skills lab. We've got to facilitate that. And how can we do that more effectively, and focused versus comprehensive? And how do you, the thinking behind that? There's so much, because what you didn't mention, Lisa, is that when you look at clinical reasoning, it's that Tanner's framework of operationalizing. What are you noticing?
Yes.
Interpreting its meaning, responding with the appropriate priority intervention, and then your evaluative reflecting. And so those are kind of the big picture chunks.
Yes.
You broke that 4 into 10, into a total of 10, but they all align with Tanner's clinical judgment model, which is really the theoretical model that informs this course. You got to remember that the next gen clinical judgment measurement model is a evaluative model. It aligns with Tanner's, but it's not quite the same. We want to use a practice-informed framework that Tanner's clinical judgment model is based on. Lassiter's clinical judgment rubric, which Shelley's going to talk about as a structure for clinical judgment reflection, breaks down the 4 processes into 11. And so these are the things that are the foundation of how we teach clinical judgment. And there's so much more, but Lisa, thank you again for just sharing your expertise in this course that can really help educators just begin to kind of like how to make that practical. And is it not a give and take? When you look back at clinical teaching, it's kind of like success and failure. Some things work, some things don't, but we've kind of distilled what is really the most effective best practice strategies and that have been road tested. Would you agree, Lisa? I mean, because I think you're
there's a lot of practical things, and like Keith said, you get a lot of our different kinds of worksheets that we've used, so it kind of gives you kind of a start, and then the explanation of how to use the worksheet is in the course as well. So
yes, exactly. So Lisa, thank you for everyone contributed in the authors worksheets and tools. That's another unique distinctive of this course, is that it's not just giving them the information they need, we're giving them the tools to operationalize these clinical reasoning piece by piece, worksheets to develop clinical judgment, clinical paperwork examples, etc. So thank you again, Lisa. Mm-hmm. It's been a pleasure to work with you. I'll kind of take you off here, and we're going to bring on, who's our next person here? We're going to bring on Rachel in just a moment, but I just want to kind of just highlight a couple modules that I developed. And one of those was lesson 10, preparing students for patient care. And really, one of the things that I think we sometimes forget is that it's, we need to remember that, the end objective is yes, the clinical judgment task, but what is some of the real world knowledge that a student needs to take as they look at what they were taught in classroom theory and operationalizing it now to the knowledge at the bedside? Like, do they know the most important, like the mechanism of action of the most commonly used medications on your unit? What are the most common problems? Do they understand the pathophysiology of the top 3 to 5 problems? We talk about that in preparing for patient care. So on your specific unit, you've got some worksheets and some handouts that I've developed through KeithRN that are in this course that operationalize that. That'll give you a structure to deepen their knowledge of what is most important to clinical practice. And then I've got a module on lesson 13 on clinical paperwork essentials. So I've got some great examples of clinical paperwork that educators have used over the years with KeithRN in our membership platform, Think Like a Nurse, that again, clinical judgment, paperwork examples, and just really some practical background and some tools to operationalize. And you can decide what you want to use out of it. With 45 tools, there's no shortage. And it's not overwhelming. It's about 2 to 3 tools in each lesson. So again, you can download them immediately, see what you think, how could that be used, and we have reflection and other questions throughout the course that you engage with, and even have a form that you fill out to kind of just interact with the content as you work through it. But I'm going to go all the way down to, then we have a lesson on eliminating clinical paperwork. And that's another strategy where you just begin to wean the amount of paperwork semester by semester to they're doing more of an oral care plan. We have that all operationalized in module or lesson 17. But now lesson 18, Rachel. Rachel Salguero. I hope I say it right. Salguero. Sounds Spanish to me, but I'm not. I don't have that roll of the tongue. So you can tell me what you.
No problem, Keith. Hello, everyone. It's Rachel Salguero.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here and have worked on this project with all of these incredible people. And as I said, I'm Rachel. I've been a nurse for about almost 17 years now. And I had my very first clinical group only after being a nurse for 3 years. So probably like many of you, I was told at the last minute that a clinical group, a school was desperate for a clinical instructor, that someone sort of just, gave up the position only a few days before. So I had no idea what I was getting into. I knew how to be a nurse on my unit, but I had no idea how to teach. And it was, a great experience for me. But I always tell this funny joke that my very first clinical group, I always wonder how they are in life right now, because I was so focused on skills. I wanted to be that cool.
So I'm not the only one who did that, Rachel. I don't have to feel like, what was I thinking? That's a pretty natural, is that a natural kind of a tendency? I think that's the genius of Benner's novice to expert theory, because it applies to a novice educator that we're just as task and skill oriented.
Exactly. Well, I want it to be the one that the students were like, "Oh, we got to do a wound vac. We got to suction a patient. We got to do all these cool things." And, I don't think I ever debriefed. Our post conference was so quick, but we did every skill on that unit. I think I may have put myself in an AKI by the end of the clinical day because I don't think I ever stopped to drink water. But so I get it. It's hard when you sort of start brand new. And I think what a lot of us do is we teach how we were taught.
Yeah.
We're not going by the literature and we're not going by the research. And that's normal because we don't know. We're not given all of the resources that, for example, full-time faculty are given, all of the faculty development. It's sort of like, okay, here's your clinical group, here are their emails, good luck. So the module that I created was on feedback, which was really hard for me to give as a new clinical educator. And I think as I have been teaching over the years and I've gotten a lot more comfortable with it, it's gotten a lot easier. But it's definitely still hard. I think anyone in life, when you say, okay, it's time for an evaluation, we all sort of are like, oh no, what will they say? What did I do wrong? So what we talk about in this module are what are some constructive ways that you can give that feedback, and using the growth mindset framework and growth mindset language to give that feedback in a supportive environment.
Yeah, and you created it, and we kind of took from your lesson, we made a template that you provided on a feedback template for clinical educators. So it's a downloadable worksheet, and it takes the best practices of looking at that of just how to structure a feedback so it is not defensive. Are there things that you learned about how to give feedback, Rachel, so it doesn't that template is very helpful, but what are some principles from that worksheet that's in the module, as well as observations to just give feedback effectively? What does that look like?
Yeah, well, I think the most important thing that we can do as clinical educators is on the very first day that you meet with your students, that you say, my role is to give you feedback. It's not a bad thing. So I think when students expect it and they know it's coming, this is before you have seen them take a blood pressure or do anything else. And it's already laid out there that this is my job to give you feedback. It really sets the stage for students, and they're not sort of like, oh no, what will she say to me? Because our job as clinical educators is we have to create residence ready nurses. We're sort of getting away from practice ready, although we do want them to be practice ready, but they're still students. They need to be residency ready, and our role is they need feedback. I still need feedback after 17 years of being a nurse, and I share that with them. I say that I am still getting feedback all of the time.
And it's part of, it's just part of that growth mindset that you want to be better. It's not, some of us are just got this perfectionistic mindset that is just not realistic. We just got to be humble enough to realize that we all want to be in a growth mindset so that we become the best that we can be, whether we're a staff nurse or a nurse educator, whatever our role is.
Yes.
And you provide some very helpful guidelines to do that. I will kind of share this comment. I want to kind of say thank you to Jennifer for sharing this. She said, when we look at just kind of like, she was kind of comment before then just saying, looking at these different ways that we're talking about with, structuring clinical and clinical teaching. What I really loved about her second comment is that, and this is an encouragement to all of us who are watching tonight, and as educators, we take small steps at a time. It really is just a journey. And I think that's, we're not going to get it right the first time, but we're on a growth journey, and
Yes.
we're going to just get better and learn more. And that's really the goal of this course, was just to provide an asynchronous, anytime you can, there's no cohort model. It can be purchased and accessed anytime, anywhere. You can choose to take what lessons you want. If you're an expert educator, if you're, you don't have to do all 20, but they all have CEs. So you can if you choose to. But it's one step at a time. And I think we need to really, any thought or comment that comes to you with that principle of a journey in small steps in closing?
Yeah, I think if you feel comfortable as an educator sharing that with your students, I think sometimes being a little bit vulnerable and regardless of how long you've been an educator and share some of your mistakes and when you've received feedback or maybe something happened and you had to do a safety report and then a policy changed at the hospital because of that. I think that goes a long way with our students and they realize, you know what? They're a human being too. They're not perfect and it really opens that door for feedback to be, we need to normalize it.
Yeah.
It's never a bad
Yeah,
thing.
that's a great point. And you mentioned that in the lesson, but it's also worth reinforcing right now. It's like feedback's expected. It's not
Yes.
going to be, what that looks like. So, yes. And Kirsten has this question, and I think she's getting ahead of herself. Where is this sheet? I have my midterm evaluation next week, and now I need it right now. You know what? If you wait about 3 weeks, Kirsten, I'll tell you, you're going to get through whatever it is. But I know that this is going to be a real helpful resource. And I just want to encourage the audience I'm going to transition to Shelley here in just a moment. But just as you look at this course, reflect on how you were taught clinical. How are your current adjunct faculty being trained? What does that look like? I'd love to get some comments or thoughts as you look at your own journey or in your program. Where are the strengths and weaknesses? Because this is really there's really nothing like this in the educator marketplace. And that's my passion, is to support educators. And so I'm really excited about the hard work that everyone in this, that has been a part of this project has put in. And Rachel, it's a pleasure to meet you. Did Lisa Gonzalez, did she loop you into this project?
Yes, Lisa and Janet
Yeah.
Monagle and Lisa, yes.
Wonderful. And so, yeah, I just got, just looking to see, there's no other comments or questions. So Rachel, I'm gonna move on to Shelley, and thank you again for your time and joining us tonight. And I'm gonna finish with Shelley Bassard. Shelley, it's been a pleasure to just, work with you at, with Icon Ed, the article that you led. I did minimal work on that with just reviewing clinical judgment and how it's being taught and evaluated. That's not the focus tonight, Shelley. You are the last two lessons of the course, 19 and 20. Mastering was using reflective journaling to evaluate clinical judgment, and then finally mastery evaluation and helping, kind of aligns with feedback, as feedback and evaluation kind of are hand in hand. But, you've written some articles on reflective journaling. I'm going to put those in the chat so that our audience can access those or see the abstract and what that looks like. And so, Shelley, I'm just going to let you share your thoughts on. Let's start with reflective journaling, and just kind of like, when we looked at reflective journaling, there's best practices, and you've been published on that topic. So I just want you to highlight some of the principles that are in the module, in the lesson, that you just make very practical for educators that are brand new, and to strengthen that evaluation of clinical judgment.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me, Keith. Reflection, I'm going to tell you, when I first heard the word in about 2011, I was working on my PhD. I had to do a residency, and I was 6 months pregnant. I had a 2.5-year-old at home, and you know how we all are. Students are all the same way. Everything's a waste of time. Why are you doing this? And whatever. But the faculty member who was leading the residency asked us all, who does reflection? And I was so annoyed. I'm like, who has time for reflection? So that kind of was one of those moments that, as I continued on with my dissertation, it was a seed that was planted that I didn't realize was there until I dug into what simulation was, how to evaluate it, and reflection just kept coming up. It is one of the last phase of Tanner's model. And in one of her articles, she mentioned that it's the key to developing clinical judgment. And that's really how that piece of my journey started. But really, with the reflection, the key that I found is the guided questions. And I think Lisa was alluding to this with her portion, and which came from Nielsen. I also was using Nielsen's article as a guide. But it's reflection with guided questions. You have to give the student guided questions, really focused with the clinical judgment model that you're using. So asking them, not just what did you notice, but give them prompts to what they noticed. What was the assessment? What was the abnormal? When you walked in the room and scanned the environment, what did you see? What safety mechanisms did you see? What things alarmed you? So that reflection journal, it started off very minimal. I had very minimal student feedback, answers on that, I realized very quickly I had to guide them more. I ended up developing more like table formats where they could put their labs and then give me the rationale. But the other thing that I learned with that is you have to give them the feedback. And I believe Rachel just mentioned that as well. They put a lot of effort into those reflection journals, and you have to give them the feedback to go with it. And that helps you with your evaluation in the end, which then is module number 20 or lesson number 20, which is the clinical evaluation tools. And when we evaluate our students, I think this goes back to everything. It really wraps up the entire course very well. Everything that you've done with Alyssa, working with getting the students into the clinical setting, to getting them set up with their students, everything Lisa talked about with how to set up the clinical portion, we also have to evaluate the student, which goes back to that feedback that Rachel mentioned. If we don't evaluate them, they don't know how to continue to improve and continue to move from semester to semester. So we have to evaluate, and as new educators, that's one of the hardest pieces as well. So how do I give a feedback to a student and evaluate them? Because I want to still be that nice faculty member, just as Rachel said. Yeah. She wants everybody to say, oh, she does the tasks. Well, I also want everybody to not be mad at me because I evaluated them too roughly as compared to other faculty. So that part is difficult. So my biggest takeaway there, or a piece of advice for all new educators, is to make sure you know what tool is being used at your school. Make sure you are trained on how to use that tool. Everybody uses a different tool. It could be self-created by your school. We use last year's clinical judgment rubric to evaluate our clinicals. So just really understanding what is used, how they use it, and be consistent with other faculty. Get a mentor, have them guide you through how they evaluate the students, how they provide feedback. As Rachel was mentioning, students take feedback very defensively. If they are like, I did everything, I woke up at 5 a.m., I got to clinical, I took care of this patient, and then you say to them, you didn't do A, B, and Z, they're going to take that defensively. So I don't know how many of my faculty actually do this, but something that I really enjoy doing is providing verbal feedback through our learning management system. Instead of just doing written feedback, which is I'm going to call it the easier way to do it. You put it in red, you put it all over their paperwork of what they've done and giving them feedback, but they don't hear your tone when you're doing that. My tone could be like really fantastic, like, oh, this is really great, you did a good thing here, but they don't hear that. So if you can do the audio feedback, if your LMS system has that, I recommend playing with that, and just so they can hear you, that like, hey, you did a fantastic job with this, and now let's take it to the next step. And this is something how I would have interpreted something, or just role modeling how you would have processed that. And they don't hear that in the written word. So with evaluation, you could do it in the moment, in the clinical setting. They just put in that Foley catheter, take them out of the room when they're done, sit down, debrief, talk about what they did, let them think through it, tell them how they felt in that process. And then of course on the evaluation tool, you're going to provide more feedback at that point as well. That reflection journal that they do, you can use that as part of your evaluation, because that's the reflecting on action component. And you can
when you look at reflection, Shelley, and you look at a 10 or 12 week clinical rotation, should we be doing reflection journaling, and you talk about some of the specific strategies of what that framework looks like and the questions to ask every week, every other week? How often have you found in your with your research and your journey, how often should we be doing reflective journaling? And at the very beginning of the program all the way through, and every week, or what's the best practice there?
Best practice that I've seen is every week. I was able to really look at the trajectory of their clinical judgment, and I could see the progress of it from their first journal through the end. And so that was my dissertation, was really looking at that development of clinical judgment across the semester. So it is time consuming to grade. Like Elisa said, you can have 8 to 10 students. Our school has between 5 and 6 students, but it is very time consuming to read it. So that really comes down to how many students you have. But I would recommend it weekly if you are able to do that. If not, then maybe at midterm and again at the final.
Okay. And Shelley, we got a question for you that I'd like to put on the screen from Mariah. Thank you for sharing. any suggestions on anecdotal notes for evaluations? Like, as you're going through the clinical day, and just what does that look like? And just kind of, how would you answer, Mariah?
So if I'm doing it on their evaluation tool, I would take a look at, for example, if they're on the reflection journal and they put down all of their lab data and they say this patient had a potassium of 6.0 and that student correlated it to such and such. I would then say, this is fantastic correlation. Yes, this went exactly with your patient. Let's compare this to a patient with acute renal failure. What would that patient's potassium look like? And I would guide them with a question about that. They may not respond back to me, but I'm hopefully planting a seed in their mind of what that might look differently. But I always try to give a positive, and then I follow it up with a potential question, or I give them additional information to help move that clinical judgment a little farther.
Excellent. And you have a whole list of other questions that you use for reflection. So there's a lot there to yet unpackage, but we don't have the time, as our time is already up, Shelley. So I want to thank you again for sharing your expertise in this course and strengthening how we can teach our clinical educators to teach the next generation. What I will share in closing here, just to wrap this up, is that there are a couple questions that I just want to answer about the course itself. Number one is that I want to put the link in where you can get an information, get into the loop. We're going to be launching this in the first week of April. And we've got a free download that you can access. One of the pathophysiology application worksheets that is a very versatile tool is a free download. So you'll get that as part of signing up for that email list. But what I wanted to answer is the question about, is there basically anything in the course about the importance of knowing what is happening in the didactic portion so you can help apply their learning? And Beth, the answer is yes. In the early lessons, they're about the foundation of clinical teaching. We have some very practical content, how that part-time clinical adjunct can stay connected to the program and get the information they need. Because as clinical educators, we want to hold our students responsible. How many of you get that question? They didn't teach me that. When they did. Happens to all of us. We don't want to, so knowing what's happening and having your finger on the pulse, especially if you're a part-time adjunct, we talked about that. So I just want you to know that question is there. Other person said the cost. The cost for this course is going to be under $300. And if you sign up for that email list, there's going to be some values or some other promotions that will lower that or give it a greater value to you. So I encourage you, if you're remotely interested or your program may be interested in, for their, how are we, and I want you all to think about how does your program mentor and to teach your part-time adjuncts, especially those that are just checking it out for the first time. How are we mentoring them to be successful so they transition? I'd love to know what some of those statistics are, because I know that we're struggling to do that. And here's a solution that I'm really excited to offer, because it's not just teaching, but again, providing the tools to operationalize. So just commend you to stay in the loop with this course and to get on that email list and stay in the touch. If you have any questions, just email me at Keith, Keith, at KeithRN.com, and I'll be glad to answer any questions you might have about the course if I did not get to them during this time. And so those of you, the educators that joined me tonight, don't leave when I sign off, because I just want to have a couple minutes with you. So stay with me. Other than that, thank you for all that you're doing. And if there's any other questions here, I'm just going to look at this one more time. What I did want to share, I want to do a call out to Rose Caballero. And Rose, is an educator in Texas, and I want to find her comment because she's the one that we featured in our blog about her work. And she just basically had a comment that she was here tonight, and now I lost her comment. But I just want to say, Rose, thank you for your service to our profession and all that you did to retire at the age of 80 to make a difference. And I know that the Lord will bless you for all your hard work and your service to this profession. So thank you. I will say in closing, I want to see if there's anything else here. Okay, here's a last question. I'm going to see if any of my guests want to raise their hand and answer this question. I'm a new faculty member, the very first time teaching in this type of setting. I have oriented many new nurses and precepted many students. What advice can you give a novice educator in lecture? A little bit off topic, but Mimi, you stuck around and you're still with us. And so who wants to take this one? Who wants to raise their hand? I'll pull you on the screen. Lisa, Shelley, anybody? All right, Lisa.
I don't mind trying. I mean, the lecture is even tougher, I would say, than clinical, because you have to make your own material. But what I would say as a novice is kind of cut yourself a break, get as much from somebody who's already taught the course as you can, and make it your own. That's a big, big, big deal, because one thing about teaching in class is your students will be able to see right through you. So you might as well be very authentic. They connect with an authentic nurse educator. I think someone mentioned it before, that when you just relate to them and say, hey, I'm only human. I'm here. I'm new, but I know this stuff, and I'll share my stories with you, and I'll help you. But stay focused. I would say this, because I just had to hop into a new course myself just to help for one semester. So I felt like I was brand new in that course for sure. And so what I did is I made a commitment to my students. I said, listen, I know what your course objectives are. I know what those things that you need to learn are, and I'm going to commit to you to help give you the tools to be able to learn this material. But I need you guys to be committed to studying and doing your part as well too. So I would say stay focused on the basics of what they need to learn. Be authentic, because if you're not, it's just not going to work, and then find as many resources from other people that have laid the foundation, and just kind of follow in their steps a little bit, just to get yourself started. Don't expect too much from yourself. You're new.
Absolutely. And maybe what I would just add to that, and then we're gonna wrap it up very shortly, is number one, share your stories, Mimi. When you have a content on this topic, if you have a story from your nursing practice, your students will forget a lot of your content. They will never forget a good story that illustrates. That's why the Good Samaritan is such a powerful example of the power of stories, called narrative pedagogy, if you want to get fancy with it, but really storytelling and how we can weave our stories into our class. That's one. The other thing is keep your lecture short, 15 to 20 minutes, 30 minutes every hour for active learning. So you don't regurgitate the textbook. You put bullet points and page numbers so they can read it. And you don't have the burden of teaching them everything from the text. They need to purchase the text, assimilate it. You just give them the page numbers. Keep it simple. That's my 2 cents, Lisa. I hope you agree with that, but I think it's common sense.
Maybe it sounds like we need another course for the new educator and lecturer. So.
Yeah, well, I just want to give Rose a shout out. She's 80 years old and said, thank you for some very good information, always willing to learn. And, at the Nurse Educator Conference, it was so fascinating, Lisa? Patricia Benner in the front row was taking notes on Marianne Jesse and the people that were the keynotes. She was just like a learner. And she's the leader of our profession, this generation. And so I love that spirit, Rose, that, it's like, and I think that embodies the lifelong learning and the spirit that we all want to embrace as educators. That's living it out. And so, Rose, thank you so much, and love that information. And so, thanks for all the comments here. I will just want to say thank you to Beth. She shared this nice comment. If you're on the fence about joining Think Like a Nurse, and the clinical course is really an extension of our membership platform that I have a link to if you want to learn more. That's geared for classroom educators with 300 cases. The clinical course is concise. It'll be kind of the KeithRN equivalent for just clinical nurse educators, just to give you an understanding. So I just want to close with that. But really, more importantly, I want to say thank you for all that you're doing in nursing education. It's hard work, but you're making a difference, and it's leaving a legacy, and people like Rose and others who serve our profession, Dr. Benner, Chris Tanner, the scholars, and each one of us, we're making a difference, and we're right where we are. It's a profession in crisis for such a time as this. And so embrace that responsibility as a nurse educator, clinical educator, and make a difference in all that you do with that same spirit that drove the modern era, in that caring, compassion, and serving others, because people have value. And that's something that really makes our profession special. So thank you again. God bless you for all you do to serve. Because those and thanks again. Have a good night. And next month, April 3rd, we're going to talk about the nuts and bolts, I think, of this course, and just share more information and answer questions. And we'll kind of launch that that same week, and I'm excited to bring this into the marketplace. Just a very boutique brand, KeithRN. I'm not big, but like Etsy, boutique brands do have a place, and I think you'll see that with this course for all the educators who contributed. So Lisa, thank you again.